All right, guys, welcome back to the Pocket Mads channel. It's Maddie here, and today we're going to take a look at a bunch of unique, creative deck lists that aren't typically very popular in the Pokemon Pocket metagame, but did well recently at online tournaments. It is sort of our off-meta showcase. We do it every Wednesday. Before we get into the decks, though, you got to go register for this weekend's PMPT tournament, PMPT number 28, Omega Shine. This is, in fact, and I said this last week, but this week it's true, the last tournament before our invitational tournament. So it's going to be a pretty big deal. Really excited. I know ranked battles are out right now. Not a ton of people are playing in online tournaments. There's also Pokemon Champions, so I understand there's a lot going on. But if you guys go ahead and register, link down in the description below, it's going to be a really fun weekend, and I would definitely recommend it. A quick update here on the channel. We do have our second channel's Champion Mads, where I upload Pokemon Champions content. I think I'm going to be alternating videos every day for a while, so we're going to keep Meta Mondays, our off-meta showcase on Wednesday, and then our best decks for ranked videos on Friday. That's going to be like the typical schedule here on the Pocket Mads channel, but if you are interested in some Champions Mads content for Pokemon Champions, it'll be over on the other channel on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and then Saturdays, I guess, potentially, maybe. But anyway, that's the plan. So let's get right into it, guys. The first deck that we're going to take a look at today is Fokker 111 from Colombia. I believe this is how you say the name. 4-2 at the Road to Victory tournament. He was playing Mega Kangaskhan, and this is going to be like a Turbo Mega Kangaskhan. Not something that I've seen many people doing, but is pretty smart. Like, I think that Zero Aura is sort of in the limelight right now with the inclusion of Electric Generator, and of course, us having Elemental Switch. The Lightning Energy package is extremely good right now. So I love Zero Aura, and here we're playing double Zero Aura, double Pichu, and then 2 Electric Generator, 2 E-Switch, and then Mega Kangaskhan. So this is like the most turbo Mega Kangaskhan deck you could possibly run. We're playing the red here to deal plus 40 damage to EX Pokemon. I really like Mega Kangaskhan. I think it's definitely still a respectful Pokemon. I think it's definitely a good card. It's seeing a little bit of play, but it really isn't that popular. This is very similar to maybe like a Turbo Manectric deck, but instead of Manectric, it's Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan's a very hard-hitting Pokemon, a very dangerous Pokemon, especially if you can consistently get it up on turn 2. Now, we are playing double copies of Illima, which I think is probably correct as well, just because if you do lead Mega Kangaskhan, you know, it's probably not something you really want too much, but technically speaking, with all of the extra energies we have going around, you can actually swap between 2 different Kangaskhan like pretty easily. So you can scoop one up in the active spot if it has any damage onto it, and then you can go into the next Mega Kangaskhan and almost kind of repeat the process. This is a really fun deck. I think that, you can play Mega Kangaskhan so many different ways. So definitely one of the more flexible Pokemon in the game, but I think this is a really smart idea, of course, because Zero Aura is pretty well positioned right now. Lightning type decks are very common. And of course, Zero Aura is just going to, do some damage in its own right. You know what I mean? So it's a pretty good lead-off Pokemon. I like the deck. It's very simple, very straightforward, and one of the few Kangaskhan appearances that I've seen this season. Now, unfortunately, like I said, there aren't that many online tournaments going on throughout the week, which is a little bit tough, especially in the midst of the ranked season just starting up. So, there's not a ton of examples to take a look at today, but I did try to pull up a couple of results that I thought were pretty interesting and deck lists that I thought were interesting. So even though this is a very simple deck list, I think it's smart. I think it's cool and it's consistent. And again, anybody out there that likes to play Mega Kangaskhan, this kind of might just be the way to do it right now, right? Which is just like maximum speed, lightning package, Mega Kangaskhan. So not much else to really say about it. Shout out to this player here, Fokker111 from Colombia. I hope that's how you say the name. He beat a lot of pretty important decks here. Did lose to Greninja Arcorio and then Mega Scizor, which probably makes some sense. But beat Altaria, beat Suicune, beat Hydreigon, and then beat Greninja Decidueye. So, had a good little run here. 4-2. I know it's not like the largest sample size of all time, but definitely a deck that can compete, you know what I mean? And I think it's a little bit reliant on the Illima stuff. But I think that whole idea is actually pretty cool. You get a little lucky with the Electric Generators and Elemental Switches, right? If you draw into them, you get that second Mega Kangaskhan going, you go Kangaskhan into Kangaskhan, and all of a sudden, you're just doing a little bit too much for your opponent to keep up, and I think that's pretty cool. So anyway, shout out to him and shout out to Mega Kangaskhan. Next up here is going to be Froggy X Fab. Again, one of the better players in the game, and this was at the Power League #1. Now, he went 6-1-1, a great record, but he was playing Mega Absol and Naganadel. And this is a pretty cool deck, a pretty fun idea that I think, makes a lot of sense. So what we saw at our tournament this past weekend was, Guzzlord and Naganadel doing quite good now. And it's definitely a pretty legitimate deck. So this player here, Fab, is actually just playing the Naganadel Nihilego package but he's playing it with Mega Absol instead of Guzzlord. And Mega Absol is a very strong closing Pokemon, right? And I think the thing is, if you're not playing Mega Guzzlord, or if you're not playing Guzzlord, not Mega, if you're not playing Guzzlord EX, you know, you don't really have like a late game Pokemon to kind of, you know, finish up the games. But Mega Absol functions very similarly to Guzzlord. What's cool about Mega Absol in place of Guzzlord is that you don't have to play Lusamine, and that's definitely a pretty big deal. And as we see, you know, Lucky Ice Pop, Mega Absol to kind of finish off games. It's honestly like a really smart deck. I think Naganadel is very much underrated, and I think Frog EX Fab kind of understood this. 6-1-1. He did lose to Mega Sizzle Revavroom, and then lost here to, or tied against the Dark Greninja deck, but beat a bunch of other decks that are all pretty relevant in the metagame. Beat Wawin's Altaria Bayonet deck as well, which is pretty cool. So I think this is really creative. You know, I think that Naganadel is just probably one of the more underrated Pokemon in the entire game. It's likely going to see a lot of play moving forward. You know, if I'm playing ranked right now, Naganadel is definitely a choice that I have my eyes on. You know, the Poison Barb, Naganadel, Nihilego stuff is going to be super fast paced, but it's going to be really nice to kind of counteract maybe some of those sleep decks and in general, those like baby Pokemon decks, right? And that's one of those things like Chingling's around, Igglybuff's around. A lot of decks in the metagame right now are not the fastest things in the world. So Naganadel has incredible pacing, and it's honestly going to be able to kind of outpace a lot of decks in the early game. Keep in mind, Nihilego, Naganadel, turn 2 will KO a Dino, which is really important. So even fast, like the fast-paced nature of Naganadel is actually going to be really impressive into like other kind of high-roll pop-off decks like Hydreigon. Same with Manectric, right? We're living an attack from Manectric, which is really important because we're going to get, you know, that electric house off, that poison damage is going to tick. You know, things like Manectric, which are kind of like the crown example of the fastest, most aggressive deck in the meta right now. You know, Naganadel just does really well into all of those decks. And, you know, stage 1 Pokemon used to not be that consistent, but I think with double copycat these days, they're actually pretty consistent. And then we got an X speed in the deck, mainly because Nihilego and Mega Absol have a retreat cost of 1. So that's another difference here, is that we're not able, really, I mean, you could, but we're not playing Celesteela. And I don't think you really need to. You know, again, like the 1 X speed here for the Nihilego stuff, if you lead with it, or Mega Absol, it's kind of all fine. You don't really want to play Celesteela because Absol, of course, is not an Ultra Piece, so it just doesn't make as much sense. And that's maybe one glaring downside, but you could cut maybe 1 extra card in here to play an extra X speed if you wanted the lead off to be a little bit more consistent. But yeah, I like it. I really like it. Again, it's very simple, but you know, straightforward, but I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, and I think that's kind of where we're at right now. You know, we're in like the 3rd week of the season. You know, the decks that people are playing, definitely straightforward, but strong, consistent decks. You know, and pacing's really important. I think a lot of the strongest decks in the game right now aren't necessarily super fast paced, which really does, you know, lend well to some of these decks that are a bit more aggressive. We're seeing that, you know, with Mega Manectric and Naganadel recently. So again, very similar to the Guzzlord Naganadel deck, but instead of, you know, the, excuse me, the Guzzlord stuff early in the game, you know, we have Mega Absol for the late game. I don't know if you need 2 copies of Mega Absol. That is certainly interesting. I just don't know if it's like something you really want to lead off with most of the time. But definitely going to be good at closing games. That's what Mega Absol does, right? Especially with Poison Barb, Nihilego, Ice Pop to potentially keep it alive. A really cool deck. You know, I thought it was pretty creative. Shout out to Frog EX Fab for his run here at the Power League #1. Next up at the PMPT number 27 tournament this past weekend is going to be Virtuer K from Taiwan. He was playing Dark Arceus, like a Turbo Dark Arceus build with it's not even Dark Art. It's just Turbo Arceus, but with Crobat. And this is a pretty cool deck. They made day 2 at our tournament, but didn't place high enough to be talked about on Meta Monday. So I wanted to highlight them in today's video. And this is going to be Turbo Arceus, right? With Pichu, Arceus, and Oricorio. But we've got the Crobat in here. And this Crobat is actually a really good card, especially into baby Pokemon, because as long as Arceus is in play, Crobat's able to just use its ability and then KO baby Pokemon, because it does 30 damage to your opponent's active. That's honestly really, really cool. Starting Plains is going to give Oricorio and Arceus a little HP buff. That's always really nice. I think Arceus is kind of underrated. As we know, sleep is very common in the metagame, but so is poison. So, you know, card like Arceus with the buffs here with Starting Plains, maybe Poncho or something to keep it safe on the bench. All really important cards. Of course, Poncho here might be useful to keep Oricorio safe on the bench, or Pichu on the bench so you don't get sniped and lose the game, or Crobat, right? So really, depending on what you need, you can put that Poncho down. I think Poncho is a really smart card in this deck. We're still playing 1 copy of Ilima, but yeah, no, I really like it. I think that Arceus is kind of underrated. Some people talked about it a little bit early this season when the sleep scam stuff started to pop up. You know, they were like, what about Arceus? You know what I mean? And it does kind of make sense. It's certainly not a weak Pokemon. It's not one of the strongest Pokemon in the game, but that's why we play Crobat. You know, Crobat plus Arceus is 130 total damage. Actually, it's more than that. I think it's 160 total damage, which is crazy. That's a lot. excuse me, that's going to KO a lot of Pokemon. But yeah, Crobat I really like. I like the whole concept of Crobat. I just think it's a really smart inclusion into a metagame right now with lots of baby Pokemon oftentimes, in the active. So yeah, cool deck. I mean, nothing else to really say about it. This player here ended up losing to Hydreigon, which probably is going to be tough, and then, double Manectric decks. And I think that's something that probably makes a little bit of sense. Didn't actually hit any sleep decks this entire tournament, which is definitely pretty rough, but definitely had a good outing. I mean, beat Charizard twice, beat Dark Greninja, beat Suicune, beat Altaria Chingling, beat Altaria Greninja, right? So other than the Manectric losses and then the loss in day 2 to Hydreigon, this player here had a really good performance. So shout out to Virtuer K? Can't say the name, man. I'm so sorry. But shout out to Arceus. Definitely pretty cool. Next up is going to be Christopher Vaughn from the United States. He went 4-1 at a small tournament recently, and he was playing Gholdengo. So I wanted to highlight this. Again, I don't know how many people have been playing Gholdengo recently, or I guess, what was the last time people saw Gholdengo? I don't think it's like the best thing in the game. He did beat a Absol Darkrai, an Altaria Greninja, Hydreigon, and a Manectric. So it is certainly possible for this deck to win games. I think Gholdengo's always been a bit of an RNG Pokemon, but I wanted to just sort of bring up a list and an example of somebody playing Gholdengo at a tournament recently and doing well. 4-1 is a great little run there. As we saw, won 4 games in a row and then lost a game in Top Cut. But, we got Orthworm in here. We got Metal Core Barrier, Lucky Ice Pops, Gholdengo. Just really all about building up that energy. It's a very straightforward deck. There are a lot of things that can hard counter Gholdengo. Like, that is the truth about this. The issue with Orthworm, one of the big issues that I found kind of turned me off from the whole Orthworm Gholdengo strategy was the fact that like Greninja decks can just sort of ping up Orthworm and then Cyrus them like back into the active, right? Because Orthworm doesn't have a way to get out of the active. Unless you're playing Revavroom in your deck, like Orthworm is just going to be stuck there because you never want to commit more energies to it, and it has a retreat cost of 3. So, and it doesn't deal any damage. So that's kind of the downside to Orthworm, is that unless it gets KO'd, it's kind of just stuck in the active spot. And that's why we play, I think, one copy of Lyra, of course. But it's that's why we're playing Lyra. Like, it is kind of a sketchy strategy. But yeah, I mean, excuse me, I'm still sick. The RNG aspect of Gholdengo is a little bit scary. That's just the reality of this Pokemon. It's not going to be the most consistent thing in the world, but if anybody's played Gholdengo or played against it, they know that it can be scary and it can win games pretty quickly. So, there's nothing too crazy here. I really like this list. Tons of healing, tons of tankiness, right? Double Core Barrier, a double Ice Pop, double Pokemon Center Lady. It's just all about, staying alive and building up that Gholdengo. Unless your opponent has a way to deal with it, like it's going to be tough. Like, you're probably going to get absolutely blown up by this thing. The spending rush attack is pretty hardcore. So again, nothing too much else to say about this. I did just want to highlight it because it is Gholdengo, and I don't know the last time I talked about it. So anyway, shout out to Christopher Vaughn from the United States. Next up is going to be Wall 456 at the Meta Break last tour before ranked. And this is going to be Lopunny. And again, Lopunny is one of those decks that I just don't think many people play. There's so many strong cards in Pokemon Pocket that basically anything, there's like 10 to 12 like real meta contending decks in the game right now. So because there are so many strong options, there's not a lot of decks that we consider like off meta decks or things that like aren't a part of the meta game that people play in tournaments. And that's why like this season in particular has been a bit harder to highlight decks like that. But here is Mega Lopunny. This player went 4-2-1. So a respectable record. I like Mega Lopunny. The issue with it always is that, again, it's a coin flip deck, so it's going to struggle sometimes. But, we're playing Lucario, so we can deal with Oricorio really easily. Hitmontop is a great leadoff Pokemon. And, yeah, I mean, it's there it is. I don't really have anything too substantial to say about Mega Lopunny, other than the fact that there are a lot of Manectric decks. And I think Lopunny's probably going to specifically do well into Manectric. But into most other things, it's just going to be a little bit scary. You are kind of at the whim of the coin flip. And so I think so many games when you're playing Mega Lopunny either come down to whether or not your opponent can break Confusion, which is much less consistent right now because of so many people playing status healing cards like Pokemon Center Lady and whatnot. So that's always an issue with Lopunny, at least this season. But also you need to flip the coin sometimes to like deal the 180 damage, because that's the strength of Mega Lopunny. With Will, that is a 50-50 shot, but you're flipping 2 coins. So Will to me never felt like it provided that much value to Lopunny, but theoretically you do have the opportunity to just one-hit KO like mostly every Pokemon in the metagame, and that's going to be substantial enough to win you some games. So again, I don't know how many people have been playing Lopunny recently. It's not something that's been on my radar. far. But somebody did bring it to a tournament and they did well. So, you know, I wanted to talk about it. Shout out to Wall456. I highly encourage all of you guys to not only compete in the PMPT tournaments on the weekends, but compete in all of these other tournaments that happen throughout the week. You know, it's healthy for the metagame. It's healthy for the Pokemon Pocket community. We're not the only tournament out there. There's a bunch of other smaller tournaments throughout the week that are definitely really fun. And Pokemon Pocket's still fun. You know, I think that this season's gone a little bit long, like in a weird way. Like I think Ranked was delayed, and now that Ranked is out, like we're in a weird position. This month particularly, especially with Champions release, has been a bit awkward for Pokemon Pocket, but the community's still here. And you guys that are watching this video today, I really appreciate it. So shout out to you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Anyway, next up is going to be Guzzlord Naganadel. So, you know, again, this deck did, I think, get like top 8 at our tournament this past weekend. I just wanted to highlight it again because this is a really strong deck. This is Itachi 1820 from Chile. 5-2-2 record here. Lost to Mega Manectric, tied a couple of games probably just to make it into day 2, and then he did lose to a Charizard deck. Yeah, for the same reasons that we talked about that Naganadel Absol deck, I honestly think that Naganadel Guzzlord is probably like one of the best meta decks in the game right now. Definitely like a top 10 deck. It's just, I think Naganadel carries right now. And very similar, as you see, the Celesteela is in here in the one Guzzlord. So basically Frog EX Fab cut a couple of cards from the deck or swapped some cards and was playing Mega Absol in place of Guzzlord. And I think there is some merit to that. Guzzlord is nice because if you lead off with it, it's a little bit fine. Like a Guzzlord lead going second has always been pretty decent because you can grind core, you have a lot of HP, and that's always pretty fun, especially with Poison Barb and Lego if they do attack you. So I like leading off with Guzzlord in the early game going second more than I like leading off with Absol. It's also a 2-prize Pokemon, which is nice, and Celesteela gives it free retreat either way. So that's always a big upside to Guzzlord. But yeah, I mean, I think, again, a deck that is just kind of getting carried a little bit by Naganadel, like we talked about with the Absol deck. But I wanted to highlight it, you know, because just another deck that is pretty substantial in the metagame, and it was not sort of a one-time thing this past weekend. It did do well at other tournaments, so here's just an example of that. Shout out to Itachi. So he lost here to Mega Manectric. A lot of these decks, oh no, we already talked about this. A lot of these decks are kind of losing to Mega Manectric because Mega Manectric is just an absolutely broken deck. That's the reality of it. But next up is going to be Mega Manectric. Palm from Germany went 6-3, but this is going to be a Galvantula Mega Manectric deck. And as we know, you know, lightning decks always get a little bit spicy when you kind of throw in a Galvantula in here. I love Galvantula. I think it also pairs quite well with Zeraora. So Galvantula does 70 damage and paralyzes your opponent. So it's basically like it stalls for a turn. It shuts your opponent down for a turn. However, it discards all of the energy onto it, which means it's really tough to attack back-to-back times with Galvantula. But that's why we have the Zeraora and the Elemental Switch, right? So it's pretty cool. I like the tech. You know, I don't know if it's better than playing like one Oricorio or not playing any Pokemon there in that slot and playing some other cards in place of it, but it is pretty cool. And I think Galvantula is one of those Pokemon that has enough support around it. It's a strong enough effect that it will be somewhat relevant kind of no matter what goes on. And yeah, I mean, I don't have too much else to say. Here's just a really cool Mega Manectric deck that just happened to be a little bit different than other Manectric decks that, of course, are all over the place. This season's kind of really just been about, you know, the Sleep Scam stuff and Mega Manectric and Hydreigon and Suicune are still relevant, but those are kind of the new cards that are really good. And I think, you know, moving forward, they're going to be good for a while. You know, they're just good Pokemon. Anyway, shout out to Palm and the Galvantula Manectric deck. Next up and lastly here at the Umbreon 99 Storm Late Night number 15 is Carson Silos from Canada. And this is, he went 4-2-2. This is Dragonite Aerodactyl EX. So this is a very interesting deck, but a very creative deck. You know, some synergy here. So this is going to be the new Dragonair, right? The Sky's Blessing Dragonair. And then Aerodactyl. And what's cool about this is that Aerodactyl here, it's kind of a control type deck. You know, like that's like the cool thing about Aerodactyl. Kind of a slept on Pokemon. The Primeval Law ability is in fact actually quite good. It's going to be really, really strong into a lot of things. Manectric is certainly one of them. So shout out to Aerodactyl. We're also playing a Primal Wingbeat Aerodactyl, which is super funny. And then we're playing Memory Light. So I think the concept with Memory Light here is that you're able to Memory Light onto Dragonite, and then you could just evolve right into it. Or what you could do, yeah, I think that's kind of the only thing you would do, but we're not playing Rare Candy in this deck, so that's actually quite odd now that I think about it. We do have Tail Strike on the Dratini, so I guess possibly you could do that if you needed to attack with Dragonair. I don't actually really know what the Memory Light is for, other than I guess, you know, you could evolve into Dragonite and then come in and Sky Blessing, and then that way you don't have only 80 HP, so you could live a hit and then kind of get a guaranteed Draco Meteor off. I think that's probably what this deck is doing, if I had to imagine. The Will does work with Aerodactyl and Primal Wingbeat, which is pretty funny. This is the original Aerodactyl. If you forget, you flip a coin, and if heads, your opponent shuffles their active Pokemon into their deck, which is pretty that's pretty funny. But it's also really cool. Like, so this card does have some synergy with Dragonite. I think this deck is definitely like a pretty big meme, but I think Memory Light on a Dragonite's actually a pretty smart decision, right? Because you're going to live a hit. So if you bring in Dragonite while it's already evolved with Memory Light, you're definitely not getting KO'd in one attack, and then you can just sort of Sky's Blessing, and then, and then just kind of come in and Draco Meteor on the following turn. And then, it's basically just a guaranteed Draco Meteor off, which is really cool. Like, I actually think that makes a ton of sense, and I think that's a pretty smart combo here. The Aerodactyl stuff is definitely more of like an anti-meta sort of meme throw-in, but I like it, you know what I mean? I like this deck. It's just, it's very interesting and very, very creative. So this was definitely like the weirdest deck that I saw this week. So, we left it for the last here, best for last. One of the stranger decks. This player here lost to Bellibolt, lost to Suicune, tied against Guzzlord and Manectric, but beat Hydreigon, beat Dark Greninja, beat Suicune, and then beat Bellibolt. So beat a lot of top meta decks. This is definitely an interesting strategy. Again, I think Aerodactyl EX is actually going to be really good into Manectric, so it can evolve in the active spot with Primeval Law, right? Also going to be good for Bellibolt. Going to be good for, those dinos that want to kind of evolve directly into, Hydreigon with Rare Candy. Also Naganadel. Like, there's a lot of scenarios where Primeval Law Aerodactyl is actually going to be kind of broken. So definitely cool. Definitely a cool deck list there. Yeah. That's all of the off-meta decks that did somewhat well at tournaments this week. Comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. I've been a little bit sick lately, but wanted to get this video out to you guys, so hopefully you guys enjoy it. Again, go check out the Champion Matt's channel if you're interested in Pokemon Champions content. Stay tuned. I will be giving you my update for the best decks to play for ranked battles on Friday, and then this weekend is PMPT number 28. And then next week is going to be pretty fun because we should be getting an announcement about the next set that it's releasing, and then, of course, we have the Invitational at the end of that week. So next week is going to be pretty fun here in the Pocket Mads community, and I'm pretty excited about that. Also, check out the Discord server. If you're not in the Discord server, join it down in the description below. All right, guys, let's wrap up the video there. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. And yeah. Bye.